there, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mildra, and I will be your gaming monk for the evening. You know, when I started this endeavor all those years ago, one of the things I never thought would happen is that I'd be building bridges with the Italian ttrpg scene. Which is funny because I don't speak Italian. But here we are with another episode of Monk Going into Strange Places. So, background. A while back, publisher Edizioni, apologies if I got it pronounced wrong, reached out to me about covering some of their games. I eventually got several books sent to me, each of them a light game that wouldn't fit enough pages to do a proper review individually. So to that end, I'm doing them as a grab bag, going over each entry and giving my thoughts. I will note, in the interest of disclosure, no money has changed hands. All that's happened is that I've been sent a few games to give my thoughts on. Of course, getting them for free will not play a factor into my assessment. Forsaken Scriptures is a Morkborg-compatible collection of maps by Nihur, again, sorry if I mispronounced it, and illustrated by Mattia Pinetti. This is under the Negrito label. I'll be starting with this one because I have the least to say on it, but that's not a criticism. What we have here are a collection of images accompanied by word maps, which is certainly a novel way to have a map, but still require a degree of imagination, especially since not all of them are traditional dungeons. Some of them are just set pieces. Furthermore, the book comes in a little slipcase that kind of reminds me of a vinyl album cover, especially with how it was packaged. Which, given how Morkborg has several doom metal playlists, a few of them you can find on Spotify, it certainly fits. Decent outing if you want some maps. Last Resort is a survivalist game by a longtime friend of the monastery, Claudio Sirena, and spoiler warning, you're going to see his name more than once here. The game involves the survivors of a Pacific island resort trying to survive after the apocalypse. Now, the game cites the Black Hack as one of its major inspirations, the central idea being managing resources to survive over the course of several sessions, played out in a scenario. As such, the managing of numbers, represented by die sizes, as well as the resources of the island, are key components. The two primary resources for players are blood and spirit, which represent your character's physical and mental well-being. The remaining resources are a bit freeform, but the game avoids the guidance problem somewhat by framing potential resources and a few questionnaires about your character. The die range for resources ranges from D4 to D10, with the trade-off being larger die make it easier to succeed on checks, but it makes it harder to gain experience points. Equipment is similarly broad, as there isn't much guidance on equipment. Checks are made using a single die roll using the appropriate resource. A 1 or 2 is a failure and the resource goes down 1 step. A 3 or 4 is a success with a consequence and the resource still goes down 1 step. And a 5 or more is a total success. If equipment is used, that equipment can lose durability on a failure or a success with consequences. Additionally, when you roll the highest result on a die, you gain an experience point. Lastly, as mentioned before, the island itself has its own resources that dwindle as the scenario continues. The form these resources take varies, but there's always 4 of them. Now, Last Resort is a flexible, resource-intensive affair, and I'd be willing to recommend it to fans of things like The Last of Us, Lost, and even Battlestar Galactica, given that one of the scenarios is doing the Lost Island in space kind of thing. I'd say it's a reflection of what the original Dead Island should have been. There's a couple spots where I think some guidance would be useful, mainly in equipment, but even with that, I'd be willing to give it a stamp of recommended. 5 Days is another game from Claudio, this one being a GM-less and dice-less game about a dysfunctional family. Now, this game leans a bit into story gaming, which is admittedly a little bit out of my wheelhouse. This is not a game you'd play at a beer and pretzels kind of event. It's a harsh affair centered around family tragedy and interpersonal relationships that spring from tragedy. The game is played using tokens, 3 for a family and 2 for each family member. I suppose in this regard it's doing a better job at role-playing than that Monster thing that Monarch and I covered a while back. These tokens are moved about in multiple scenes themed around the 5 stages of grief. Now on the back there's a short list of suggested music, which I think is fitting for this game, and I would give it a grade of playable personally. Not because it's not my kind of game, but because it's going to be a tricky one to recommend to others, as it's going to fit a specific table and a specific mood. That's too many asterisks for me to go higher than playable. Moving on to Cthulhu Bay, this is a Lovecraftian investigation game, albeit a lighter affair than the likes of Trail of Cthulhu. I will notice a nice touch that the pages feel like the pages of an old novel rather than something smoother. which is a nice touch, especially given the pulpness. Doubly so since there's a bunch of old ads throughout the pages. Much like Last Resort, it's utilizing a resource-based set of die for its core mechanic, capping at D8 for the attributes of torches, voice, self-control, and physique. Beyond that, the game's focus is on uncovering clues for a given mystery and the consequences of trying to uncover those clues. The mystery culminating with an epilogue. I'd give this a stamp of recommended, though I should note I'd like a little more guidance when it comes to what forms clues can take. I see this as something for folks who want a lighter version of what's in Trail of Cthulhu. Good for one-shots and scenario play. There's even a couple of scenarios in the back end of the book. And by back, I mean the second half, because it's not very page-intensive. Anyway, moving on. Our final entry is Green Oaks. Created by Roberto De Luca, Green Oaks is a game about seniors in a retirement home that may or may not be a front for alien experimentation. At least that's the rumor. I do like that the book sets itself up like a brochure guide to the residents, with a bit of dry wit not far removed from a Douglas Adams story. Instead of using dice, the game uses a playing card deck shared amongst the table. It even goes so far as to say that the only dice that exist are D6s, and more complicated dice for kids pretending to be sparkly vampires. Hey, that's in the text, don't look at me. Now, the card system is loosely inspired by Bridge, but one, you don't need to know the rules of Bridge, and two, I don't, and I was still able to make sense of how this thing works. Now, at the start of play, the GM draws one card to determine which suit is the trump suit. When performing actions, you draw a card, and the consequences of it are determined whether it's the matching suit or not. This can result in different effects based on whether the card is an ace, a face card, a deuce, i.e. a 2, or any other number. This is also played into resources, bother, and haughtiness. When either of these are full, your character either makes a scene in the former, or starts a rumor with the latter. Green Oaks is the most beer and pretzels entry within this bunch, and while it wouldn't be my choice for such nights, I could see this being run in a humorous one-shot, especially on Halloween season. And that's all of them. This was a little bit removed from my usual fare, but an interesting experiment to try nonetheless. I'm glad to see that more work from the Italian scene is getting into my hands one way or the other, and I look forward to covering more of MS Edizione's output in the future. Maybe someday I'll also get to read some of the projects I've seen in Italian but have only been teased at me for years, including some from Fumble GDR as well. Stay frosty!